Hey, I'm D, and I like comics. In the immortal words of Ice-T, I ain't no Marvel comic, but when it comes to game, I'm atomic. At dropping it straight, point blank and untwisted, no imagine needed, cause I lived it. This ain't no fucking joke, this shit is real to me. I'm Ice-T. O.G. This is easily the whitest thing I've ever done. Superman. What could I possibly say about this character that you don't already know? Did you know that the origin of Superman used to be that he was a baby sent back in time by the last man on Earth to right the world's wrongs? Did you know that originally Superman couldn't fly? Whoa! Did you know that Superman was originally conceived as a balding, telepathic supervillain hell-bent on world domination? So any of you who saw my last video are probably wondering, wait, didn't you just talk a bunch of shit about Superman? Not really. You see, what I brought up was what I perceived to be a flaw in an otherwise solid character. That's just the thing about Superman. You get this impression from him that he's always on the right side of history. So when he acts in a way that you would consider flawed, it really stands out. Now, of course, in any discussion of Superman, I have to explain which Superman I like, and there are a lot to choose from, as he's been revamped and retconned several times. In truth, once again, I have to go with all of them, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would absolutely be the modern rendition, the one that most people know of, the post-86 Superman. You see, in the wake of the Infinite Crisis, he was retconned once again. This time, however, we got a Superman whose parameters were far more defined. He was a bit more down-to-earth, yet somehow also more godlike. And, of course, he wasn't making up powers on the fly. Mostly. So why do I like this character? Well, for one, Superman's iconic. Probably the most iconic superhero. Now, I said before that one of the biggest things I enjoy about superheroes are their rogues galleries. And Superman is a huge example of this. His villains range a wide gambit, all of them interesting. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. Lex Luthor, I love Lex Luthor. I think mainly I like Lex Luthor because I think in a way I am this person. He's a cynic with a dark sense of humor. A person who's constantly looking around at the world around him like, what a bunch of bubbling idiots. And one of my favorite things about him is his motivation against Superman. You get this impression that he thinks he should have been this world's golden boy, and Superman is completely stealing his spotlight. Darkseid is just diabolical. When they go into detail on some of the things that he does on Apocalypse, it's psychology meets voodoo in a really interesting way. And then, of course, Brainiac. Love Brainiac. But if I keep talking about Superman's villains, I could go on and on and on forever. One of the biggest things I can do to explain why I like Superman, I think, is actually to address a lot of the complaints I hear against him. Superman has a lot of haters. Now, Superman hatred to me is akin to Disney hatred or Nintendo hatred. They're all huge. They are all both pioneers in their respected fields. They blaze trails that most try to follow, but in the end, most fail. See, when you're high up on a pedestal and you're doing great, everybody wants to knock you down. So one of the common complaints is that Superman is too generic. He's often called this cookie-cutter superhero. Well, the thing you'd have to understand about that is that Superman is not the cookie in this scenario. He's the cutter. You see, before Superman debuted in 1938, nobody knew what the hell a superhero was. So naturally, he created the formula. Now, when we are completely flooded with superheroes, we see him as just another generic one, not understanding that it's not him who's copying off of everyone else, it's actually everyone else who's sort of taking cues from him. Another complaint I often hear about Superman is that he's too powerful or overpowered. Anybody who says this is clearly missing the point of a Superman story. See, his story has nothing to do with his powers. It has nothing to do with him overcoming any great odds. The Superman story is a struggle of a god among men who is trying to belong to the world of men. His story is also one about absolute power and it corrupting absolutely. He is constantly struggling in his stories between what he can change and what he should change. And this plays a huge part in the overall theme of the character. What I find funny about this complaint is that most of the people who make it don't seem to apply the same logic to some of their own favorite superheroes. So here's another common complaint. How come nobody ever seems to notice that Clark Kent is Superman? Most people seem to attribute this to the glasses. For a while there was this theory floating around that the glasses were magic. And in fact the comics sort of played into this by hinting that they were possibly Kryptonian tech, and that the lenses were putting out a hypnotic frequency. No. See, what most people don't realize is that with Clark Kent, it's not a physical disguise, it's an act. He raises his voice a little bit, he slouches his shoulders, he wears clothes that are a bit too baggy. The way he talks and represents himself, although sometimes assertive, is often clumsy, bumbling even. He's insecure. He's the kind of person that most people would just glance right over, never even notice. He's that guy at the office that you didn't know was there until you finally had to interact with him. See, Clark Kent plays it up so much that when you look at him, you don't see the person behind the glasses, you see the personality behind the glasses. And it just so happens that it's a personality nobody would ever connect to the person like Superman. One of the common complaints I hear has to do with the movies, and I understand. I'm talking about comic book characters here, not just movies. But I feel it necessary to bring this up because it sort of just drives home the point that people don't know what the fuck they're talking about when they talk about Superman. And that complaint is, of course, the obvious Christian imagery. For those of you who find this to be an issue in the movies, I highly recommend not reading the comics then, because that shit is all over the place. I mean, what do you expect? He's a giant golden god to these people. Not to mention, this is a savior story. So naturally, they're going to have a lot of savior imagery in there. I mean, I could go on, but let's face it. If you hated Superman before this video, is it going to change your mind? You didn't have any real reason to hate him before, you're just going to keep on hating him for no reason now. That's fine. But to me, the leader of the best superhero team is one of the best. No doubt about it.